I'm Alice Mitchell. I'm 28 years old, a U.S. Army combat medic who survived 2 deployments and saved 15 lives under enemy fire. But none of that ever really mattered to my family. Not truly. At my brother's engagement party, dressed in my formal uniform, I watched them celebrate his courtroom victories, while calling my battlefield wounds just a training accident. They laughed at my uniform, ignored the medals on my chest, and reminded me, yet again, that I was the family's disappointment. But everything changed the day I stood in the White House, receiving the Distinguished Service Cross from the President himself. Before I tell you what he said, and how my family reacted when the truth finally came out, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been overlooked by the people who were supposed to see your worth first, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is for you. I grew up in a pristine colonial house nestled in the quiet suburbs of Greenwich, a place where success wasn't just expected, it was measured in Ivy League degrees and academic trophies. My father, Dr. William Mitchell, was the proud chair of economics at a prestigious university. My mother, Dr. Margaret Mitchell, made her mark in biochemistry and was known across her field for her research. My older brother, Ethan, followed in their footsteps with seamless grace, valedictorian, then on to a top law firm before the ink on his diploma had even dried. In the Mitchell family, reputation wasn't just valued, it was sacred. Everyone had a role to play in protecting it. Everyone, except me. From the time I could spell my own name, it was assumed I would become a doctor. Not just any doctor, but one educated at Harvard, maybe Yale, if things went sideways. My parents didn't hope for it, they planned it. Summer science camps were non-negotiable. Tutors came and went like rotating staff in a hospital ward, ensuring every grade met perfection. They even curated my friendships, introducing me to the children of their colleagues, the kids who were already on the right path. My bedroom walls weren't lined with movie posters or teen idols. No, mine bore human anatomy charts and the periodic table. But something else took hold of my imagination when I was just 9 years old. My grandfather, my dad's father, had served as a combat medic during World War II. It wasn't a story told often in my house. My parents preferred to highlight his post-war career as a hospital administrator, safe, polished, predictable. But when I sat with Grandpa alone, away from the perfect Mitchell facade, the past would leak out in fragments. "I didn't save the world from a fancy research lab, Alice," he'd whisper, his voice hoarse with memory. "I saved it one soldier at a time, in the mud and blood." Once he showed me his medic badge and explained how he treated the wounded under fire in the fields of France. That badge meant more to me than every academic trophy crammed into our family's glass display case. High school was a balancing act. I was a solid B+ student, not a genius, but not struggling either. I shined on the track and in the pool, earning medals and school records. My guidance counselor believed I had real potential, perhaps not Ivy League, but certainly strong pre-med programs at respected schools. My parents, however, couldn't mask their disappointment. My SAT scores weren't perfect. "Your brother got a full score," my mother would remind me, as if I needed help remembering. "He could go anywhere." When application season came, I followed orders. I applied to the schools they circled in red ink. The rejection letters trickled in, one by one. I was waitlisted at 2, accepted at 3 lesser-known universities. The look on my parents' faces said everything. "We'll manage," my father sighed, as if I were a burden he'd just resigned himself to carry. "State school it is. Maybe you'll transfer somewhere better later." And just like that, I was quietly declared the family's disappointment, wrapped in polite words, but carrying all the weight of a final judgment. That spring, something happened that changed the course of my life. A military recruiter came to visit our high school. While most of my classmates walked right past the Army table with rolled eyes and barely a glance, I found myself drawn in, pulled by something I couldn't quite name at the time. Sergeant Amanda Wallace spoke with quiet conviction about purpose, service, and the calling of being a medic in the Army. She painted a picture of becoming part of something greater than yourself. Not for prestige, but for meaning. For the first time, I saw a path that felt like mine. At 19, after a miserable semester at the state university my parents had reluctantly agreed to, I made a decision that would set me free and set everything else ablaze. I enlisted in the United States Army as a combat medic. I still remember the dinner table the night I told my family. My father's whine nearly went down the wrong pipe. The army, he sputtered. That's for people who don't have options, Alice. What on earth are you thinking? My mother covered her face. Where did we go wrong with you? She murmured. We gave you every opportunity. But the worst blow came from my brother, Ethan. He laughed, actually laughed. You playing soldier now, Alice? Come on, you know they'll just stick you in some office pushing paperwork. This isn't a movie. You're not going to be saving lives in the trenches. I'll be a combat medic, I said, my voice trembling but firm. Just like Grandpa. My father didn't miss a beat. Your grandfather made something of himself after the war. He didn't throw away his future. That night, I sat on my childhood bed with 2 pieces of paper in my hands. One, a college acceptance letter to a school I didn't want to attend. The other, my enlistment papers. By morning, the choice was clear. 2 weeks later, I boarded a bus for basic training. My parents' disapproval and my brother's mockery riding with me like unwanted passengers. Basic training tested me in ways I never thought possible. The physical demands were brutal, sure, but it was the mental and emotional challenges that cut deeper. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being measured against my family's legacy. No one cared about SAT scores or prestigious bloodlines. What mattered was grit. What mattered was teamwork. What mattered was whether I could perform under pressure, and I could. I flourished. I graduated near the top of my basic class and advanced to specialized combat medic training. It was there I found what felt like a calling. My instructors noticed it too. One of them pulled me aside and said, Mitchell, you've got the hands and the head for this job, but more importantly, you've got the heart. That Christmas, I came home in uniform, hoping, just maybe, that something had changed. I had earned my badge. I had stood tall in the face of everything they thought I couldn't do. And yet, nothing. When are you going to stop playing dress-up? My mother asked, as I helped her in the kitchen. My brother, grinning with that same smug tilt to his head, chimed in. Cute uniform, but let's be honest, you're probably just handing out ibuprofen in some clinic. They didn't ask about my training. They didn't care to know what I'd learned or what I'd survived. My father changed the subject any time the army came up. By the time I returned to base, I understood something with painful clarity. My family would never value the road I had chosen. If I wanted respect, I would have to earn it elsewhere. Combat medic training pushed me further than I ever thought I could go. We learned to insert IVs while wearing chemical suits, apply tourniquets in total darkness, and assess trauma under simulated enemy fire. Our instructors pushed us to the edge, and then pushed us even further. In combat, there are no second chances, they reminded us daily. Your training must be flawless. The battlefield does not forgive mistakes. Somehow, I rose to the challenge. My hands stayed steady in high-pressure scenarios. My mind absorbed protocols with precision and clarity. I became a crack shot on the range, earning expert-level scores, and my fitness numbers ranked near the top of my unit. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. I was building something of my own, calloused, tested, and real. And for once, it felt like I was becoming someone. Not someone my parents had engineered, but someone I could respect when I looked in the mirror. After graduating from combat medic training, I was assigned to the 10th Mountain Division, and not long after, I received orders for deployment to Afghanistan. Before shipping out, I made one last call home. A part of me still hoped, perhaps foolishly, that my parents might show a flicker of concern or pride. Instead, my mother's voice was flat, distant. Afghanistan, she said. I suppose that was inevitable, given your career choice. My father's words were colder. Keep your head down, don't try to be a hero. No, be safe. No, we're proud of you. No care packages or handwritten notes, while my fellow soldiers clutched letters and photos from home like lifelines. But in the dust and danger of Afghanistan, I found another kind of family, one built not by blood, but by fire. My unit became my lifeline. We laughed through sandstorms, shared fears during long watch shifts, and threw makeshift birthday parties with cake baked from MREs. We protected each other like siblings. Sergeant Lisa Jackson, our team leader, stepped into the mentor role I had always longed for. She was tough but fair, demanding but affirming. She didn't care where you came from, only whether you showed up when it mattered. And one day, I had to show up in a way that would change me forever. 3 months into our deployment, our convoy was hit by an improvised explosive device. The lead vehicle flipped violently, trapping 2 soldiers inside. Without thinking, I ran toward the smoking wreckage, clutching my medic bag like a lifeline. Enemy fire crackled in the distance as I dragged Sergeant Ryan Cooper from the twisted metal and dropped to my knees beside him. His femoral artery had been severed. Blood poured into the dirt like water from a broken pipe. "Stay with me, Cooper," I shouted, as I applied a combat tourniquet and started an IV, shielding him with my own body. 14 minutes. That's how long I kept him alive, through pressure, fluid, and pure determination, until the medevac helicopter arrived. Captain Michael Williams witnessed the whole thing. "Mitchell," he said afterward, "you've got ice in your veins. Cooper would have died without you." The story spread quickly through the chain of command. I was awarded the Army Commendation Medal with Valor Device. I called home to share the news. My mother's response? "That's nice, sweetheart. Did you hear Ethan made junior partner at his firm?" Her words didn't sting like they once might have, but they still landed like a cold wind in the desert night. As the months wore on, I grew into my role. I treated everything from battlefield trauma to stomach bugs, slowly earning the respect of even the most skeptical infantrymen. I was promoted to corporal ahead of schedule, recognized for leadership that exceeded my age and medical skills sharpened under fire. Over 18 months, I helped save 11 lives in active combat situations. Every time I stabilized a wounded soldier long enough for evacuation, I felt something powerful, something clear, a purpose that no family judgment could erase. While I was still deployed, Ethan graduated from law school. My parents threw him an extravagant party. They flew me home on leave, though it felt more for appearances than affection. The contrast between my daily life and their world of privilege hit me like a sandbag. At the party, I stood awkwardly in the corner while relatives fawned over Ethan like he'd cured cancer. My uniform drew curious glances, but few questions. When my uncle finally asked about my service, my father cut in before I could answer. "Alice is doing fine with her military experience," he said dismissively. "But today is about Ethan. Did you know he graduated 3rd in his class?" That night, as the noise faded and the house emptied, my mother glanced at the ribbons on my uniform. "What are all those colorful things for?" she asked, as if they were decorations rather than the marks of service and sacrifice. "This one's for combat medical service," I replied. "And this one's my commendation medal for valor." "Interesting," she said, before quickly shifting gears. "Have you met your cousin Allison? She just finished her residency at Johns Hopkins. Now that's a real medical career." The next morning, I returned to base with a heavy heart. The emotional distance between us had grown so wide, no flight in the world could close it. The second deployment was looming, this time to a region teetering on the edge of all-out war, the Middle East. The pre-deployment briefings were sobering, filled with intelligence reports about escalating enemy activity. The area had become a geopolitical powder keg. Iranian strikes were no longer erratic outbursts of emotion. They were calculated cuts, bleeding billions from Israel's costly defense system. Every drone or missile they launched forced Israel to intercept. With each counterstrike costing millions, news outlets buzzed with footage of U.S. carriers and fighter jets racing to the region, refueling midair like pieces in a deadly game of chess. Even senior U.S. defense officials warned that our supply of interceptor missiles was dwindling faster than we could replace them. One even suggested the unthinkable, that we might soon have to ration them, prioritize targets instead of shooting down everything in sight. On the night before departure, I made one last call home, hoping for something, anything to ground me. "We're deploying to a particularly unstable area," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I just wanted to talk before we go." My father's voice came cool and clipped. "Don't go playing hero over there. Real heroes come home and build something meaningful with their lives." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I have to go now. We leave early tomorrow." "Email when you can," my mother added, half distracted. "Oh, and your brother's engagement party is next month. We'll send you pictures." When the line went dead, it wasn't silence I heard. It was confirmation. Any recognition or affirmation I sought from the Mitchells would never come. That night, I wrote a letter to myself, sealed and tucked away, only to be opened if I didn't return. "You chose a life of purpose," I wrote. "No matter what happens, remember, Your worth isn't measured by their understanding. 6 months into my second tour, something unexpected happened. I was selected for a specialized medical support unit. My commanding officer had nominated me based on my performance during several high-stress missions. The selection process was brutal. Grueling physical evaluations, high-pressure medical simulations, psychological screenings to test our ability to operate under classified, no-fail conditions. "This isn't standard combat medic duty, Corporal Mitchell," said Lieutenant Colonel James Davis during my briefing. "You'll work with small teams in high-risk environments with minimal backup. Missions are classified. Mistakes are unacceptable." Training with the Special Operations Med Team was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. We practiced life-saving procedures while sleep-deprived, simulated surgeries inside moving vehicles, and learned advanced techniques not taught in regular medic school. The elite operators I trained with didn't care about gender or pedigree. They cared about precision, competence, and trust. For the first time, I felt completely judged on what I could do, not where I came from. Then came April 15th. We received intel that 3 American aid workers had been taken hostage in a remote mountain region. They'd been missing for 2 weeks, and intelligence suggested they would be moved or executed within 48 hours. Our 12-person team, with me as the sole medic, was assigned to bring them home. The mission briefing was tense. Satellite images revealed a heavily guarded compound, nestled in rugged terrain. The plan called for a nighttime helo insertion, a swift and silent raid, and immediate extraction of the hostages. My role was to stay with the helicopter until the team secured the captives, then move in to administer aid. "Expect dehydration, malnutrition, maybe signs of torture," I told the team during the medical brief. "Priority is stabilize for transport." We lifted off just past midnight, 2 Blackhawks slicing through a moonless sky. The team was silent, each of us wrapped in our own thoughts. I checked my medic bag one last time, making sure I could find every tool by feel alone. Captain Aaron Davis caught my eye across the dim cabin and gave a simple nod. No words were needed. 20 minutes out from target, disaster struck. Alarms shrieked as the lead helicopter took enemy fire. Major Samantha Reynolds, our pilot, struggled to maintain control as the hydraulics failed. The chopper spiraled, crash-landing hard into a narrow valley 3 miles short of our objective. The impact slammed me into the wall of the cabin, dazed me for a heartbeat. Smoke filled the air, groans of the injured surrounded me. The world tilted, but my training took over. I crawled toward the cockpit. Major Reynolds was slumped over the controls, blood pouring from a head wound. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant James Wilson, had a compound fracture in his left arm. "We've got to move," Captain Davis shouted over the noise of the second Black Hawk circling overhead. Enemy converging on our position. I stabilized Reynolds' neck and helped drag her out of the cockpit, packing her head wound and injecting Wilson with morphine before splinting his arm. Bullets cracked nearby as I pulled both pilots to cover behind a cluster of rocks. "The second helo can't land. Too much hostile fire," Davis reported. "We're on our own until they can clear the LZ." In minutes, our 12-person team, now with 2 badly wounded, was surrounded by roughly 30 enemy fighters. I split my attention between returning fire and tending the injured. When Specialist Thomas Rivera was shot in the thigh, I crawled through a hail of bullets to reach him. "Press here," I told him, guiding his hand to the wound while I prepped a tourniquet. Dirt exploded around us as enemy rounds landed within inches. For 4 relentless hours, we held our ground. Ammunition ran dangerously low. I rotated between casualties, changing dressings, administering fluids, maintaining airways. When Sergeant Derek Phillips took a chest shot that nearly punctured his heart, I performed an emergency needle decompression by flashlight, biting down on it just to see. "Mitchell," Captain Davis shouted. "We need coordinates for an airstrike. You're the only one with eyes on their main position." I crawled to the edge of our defensive ring, fully exposed, bullets snapping past. 1 round grazed my helmet as I radioed in the coordinates. Minutes later, the thunder of jet engines roared through the valley, then silence. Half the enemy position disappeared in a fireball of precision and fury. As night gave way to dawn, the situation deteriorated fast. Major Reynolds' condition worsened by the hour, and 3 more team members had taken hits. Then came the grenade, an explosion that rocked our position and sent shrapnel tearing through my left leg. The pain was immediate and savage, but there was no time to acknowledge it. Sergeant Kyle Bennett had taken the brunt of the blast. Ignoring my own injury, I dragged him 20 yards to a better cover spot, applied a chest seal to his sucking wound, and started an IV while using my body as a shield against incoming fire. "Stay with me, Bennett," I whispered, watching his oxygen saturation dip on my portable monitor. "Your kids need their dad to keep fighting." By midday, the enemy had reinforced. Captain Davis made the brutal call to split our team. "Mitchell, take the most critical wounded and move east, toward that ridge. We'll draw their fire. The second bird will meet you there." I didn't hesitate. We fashioned makeshift stretchers from whatever we had: straps, ponchos, bits of webbing. Every step sent fire through my leg, but I kept going, checking vitals, adjusting bandages, whispering encouragement. We moved under cover of darkness, dodging patrols, conserving every drop of saline, every gauze pad. 48 hours after the crash, we reached the evac point. Relief swept over me like a tide when I heard the blades of the chopper slicing through the air. Only after liftoff did I finally allow myself to examine my own wound. Shrapnel had torn through muscle, but missed arteries. It would hurt, but it wouldn't kill me. Back at base, I learned the rest of our team had been extracted just hours after us. The mission had been called off. The hostages remained in enemy hands. What I didn't know, what none of us knew at the time, was that the intelligence I'd relayed over the radio during those desperate hours, including enemy positions and numbers, would become pivotal in a later operation. That mission not only recovered our original targets, but freed 24 additional captives. Due to the classified nature of the rescue, none of it was made public. My injury earned me the Purple Heart, and my actions were quietly commended in a sealed commendation added to my record. But the full story was reserved for those with the right clearance. From my hospital bed, I called home. I thought maybe, news of the injury might shake something loose in them. A trace of concern, a pause, anything. But my father only asked, "Will this affect your service contract? Maybe this is a sign you should consider another path." I didn't have the energy to feel hurt anymore. "It's just a leg wound," I replied flatly. "I'll be back with my unit in a few weeks." The physical wound healed, left a ragged scar down the side of my thigh like a signature etched in pain. But the other scars? They lingered. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the quiet guilt over Sergeant Bennett, who didn't make it despite everything I tried. Still, through it all, one thing had never been clearer. I had found my purpose. In those brutal hours under fire and fear, I had saved 15 lives with my own hands. And what I couldn't know, what none of us could, was just how many more would be saved by what we accomplished that night. 6 months after the mission, 3 in physical rehab and 3 in outpatient PTSD therapy, I was granted 30 days of medical leave. The doctors had done their part, stitched torn muscle, restored my full range of motion, but no surgeon could fix the invisible wounds. The startled response that made me flinch at every slammed door, the nightmares that left me gasping in the dark, the sudden flashbacks to a blood-soaked valley halfway around the world. The mission was still classified. I couldn't talk about those 48 hours, not even with the therapist who sat across from me week after week, trying her best to reach through the silence. "I can't go into details," I kept repeating. "I just have to learn to live with what happened." I visited my family with a strange mixture of hope and dread. Some foolish, lingering piece of me still craved their recognition, their validation that the road I had taken held value. I had earned the Purple Heart. I had received a classified commendation letter from a general whose name most civilians wouldn't recognize, but whose respect meant everything to me. Maybe, just maybe, this time they'd finally see me. The Mitchell home hadn't changed. The lawn was still flawless. The windows sparkled. The living room trophies, Ethan's awards, their degrees, plaques from universities and conferences, were still front and center. Ethan was visiting with his new fiancée, Charlotte, a tax attorney he'd met at his firm. My mother had organized a celebratory dinner in their honor. She had, apparently, forgotten I was arriving that same day. "Oh, Alice," she said at the door, blinking at my pressed uniform and the gleam of the Purple Heart. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. We're having a small engagement dinner for Ethan and Charlotte tonight." "You told me to come today," I reminded her softly, already feeling like an intruder. "But it's fine. I'm happy to meet Charlotte." Dinner was unbearable. My parents and Ethan dominated the conversation with stories of his latest courtroom wins, his high-profile clients, The wedding plans already in motion. Charlotte, to her credit, tried to include me, asking polite questions about my service, but my father cut her off every time. Alice is just doing a stint in the army, he said dismissively. It's not nearly as exciting as your work in corporate law. When Charlotte noticed the Purple Heart pinned to my uniform and asked about it, my mother actually rolled her eyes. She got a little injury during some training exercise, she said. The military hands out medals for just about anything these days. It wasn't a training exercise, I said, my voice tightening. The Purple Heart is specifically for injuries received in combat against hostile forces. Combat, Ethan snorted. Come on, Alice, you're a dressed-up nurse. You probably tripped over a tent stake or something. Something inside me cracked. Years of being minimized, dismissed, treated like I was something less. It all surged forward. I was wounded by enemy fire while treating injured soldiers, I said quietly, but with steel in my voice. I spent 48 hours evading hostiles while keeping 4 critically wounded teammates alive. One of them died in my arms, despite everything I tried. The table fell into stunned silence. My father cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Well, if you'd gone to medical school like we suggested, he said finally, you could be saving lives in a real hospital, not playing war hero. Playing war hero, the words hung there like smoke. What exactly do you think I'm playing at? I asked. What your father means, my mother interjected quickly, is that there are more respectable ways to practice medicine. Your cousin Allison is an excellent doctor. Yes, I know, I replied sharply. You've mentioned her achievements roughly 47 times since I enlisted. Ethan chuckled. Someone's a little sensitive. We all know you joined up because you couldn't hack it academically. There's no shame in that, Alice. I rose slowly, hands flat against the table to steady their trembling. In the last 5 years, I've saved more lives than I can count, I said. I've performed emergency procedures under enemy fire that most hospital doctors wouldn't dare attempt in their entire careers. I've earned the respect of some of the most elite soldiers in the U.S. military, and not once, not one single time, has any of you asked me what I actually do. My mother shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. We just worry you're wasting your potential. Do you tell your friends? I asked suddenly. Do you ever mention to your colleagues at the university that your daughter serves in the military? Or am I such a disappointment that you pretend I don't exist? The flicker in my father's eyes said more than any words could. The military is a perfectly respectable temporary career, he said stiffly. We just always expected more from you. More, I echoed, my laugh bitter. I've been shot, blown off my feet. I've operated on dying men with little more than gauze, morphine, and my own 2 hands. I've held the hands of soldiers as they took their final breaths. I've written letters to parents, your age, telling them how brave their sons were in their last moments. What exactly is the more you expected of me? A real career, my father snapped. A position of dignity in society. Not this desert soldier nonsense. You've always been the family's disappointment, Alice. The army is just your excuse for not facing that. Those words, you've always been the family's disappointment, hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard the sentiment before, but hearing it spoken aloud, so plainly, tore something deep inside me. I left without another word, ignoring my mother's half-hearted call after me. In the rental car, parked on their perfect driveway beside their luxury vehicles, I finally let myself break. The sobs came fast and violent, shaking my entire body. It was everything, the trauma, the stress, the rejection, all crashing down at once like a dam giving way. My phone rang. It wasn't my family. It was Sergeant Monica Torres, my closest friend from the unit. Hey Mitchell, just checking in. How's the leg? How's the grand family reunion going? I couldn't answer, just choked gasps. I'm on my way, she said immediately. Text me the address, don't move. 2 hours later, she showed up at the hotel I'd checked into after fleeing my parents' house. She didn't try to fix me. She just sat with me through the night as I finally let it all out. The mission, the loss, the truth that my family would never, ever understand. Your worth isn't defined by people who don't understand what you do, she said, voice sharp with conviction. It's defined by the lives you saved, by the soldiers who trusted you to keep them alive, by the missions you carried on your back. When my leave ended, I returned to base with a formal request for reassignment. I needed distance, Not just from the trauma of that mission, but from the deeper wound that came from my family's refusal to see me. As the plane lifted off, I realized I felt lower than I had in those desperate hours behind enemy lines. At least then, I'd had a purpose. The transfer came through quicker than expected. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center was seeking combat medics with field experience for its Wounded Warrior program. The position would allow me to use every hard-earned skill to help injured service members in their recovery, and station me within driving distance of Washington, D.C., far enough from Greenwich to avoid unplanned family visits, close enough should a real emergency ever arise. At Walter Reed, I found something I hadn't expected, a new kind of purpose. The warriors I worked with didn't just understand. They lived what I had been through. Many had served in the same campaigns, faced the same dangers. We spoke the same language. We recognized the same haunted look in each other's eyes. Captain James Rodriguez, who had lost both legs to an IED, became one of my regular patients. During his grueling physical therapy sessions, we built a bond rooted in mutual respect. "You've got a gift, Corporal Mitchell," he told me one day, wiping sweat from his brow. "You get it, not just the physical part of recovery, but the mental war that comes after. That's rare." I poured everything I had into the work, developed new protocols for managing pain during therapy, created peer support groups for soldiers battling combat trauma. My commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Wright, noticed. "Your innovations are making a real impact," she told me during my performance review. "Recovery rates in your program are 15% higher than standard protocols." That's not a coincidence. What I didn't know, what was happening behind the scenes, was that my story hadn't ended in that valley. Unbeknownst to me, members of my old Special Operations Unit had begun sharing what really happened during our failed mission. Captain Davis, now promoted to Major, submitted a detailed report of my actions during those harrowing 48 hours. The intelligence we gathered under fire had, in fact, led to the successful rescue of not just the original hostages, but additional captives. It had also dismantled an emerging terrorist network that had been planning an attack on U.S. soil. 6 months into my assignment at Walter Reed, I received a call that stopped me cold. It came from the Pentagon, a voice I didn't recognize, formal and clipped. "Corporal Mitchell," the caller said, "you are requested to report to the Office of the Secretary of the Army at 0900 tomorrow. Dress uniform required." My stomach churned. Calls like that rarely brought good news. Was something in my classified record being questioned? Was there an inquiry into the failed mission? I spent a sleepless night retracing every decision I'd made during those 48 brutal hours, wondering if one misstep had finally caught up with me. When I arrived at the Pentagon the next morning, I was escorted to a private office where a 2-star general awaited me, flanked by a civilian in a dark suit. "Corporal Mitchell," the general began, extending his hand. "I'm Major General Robert Harris. This is Mr. Andrew Collins from the White House Military Office." I must have looked thoroughly confused because Mr. Collins offered a small smile. "Corporal, your actions during Operation Silent Rescue have been reviewed at the highest level. Due to the classified nature of the mission, proper recognition was delayed. That oversight is now being corrected." General Harris slid a folder across the desk. "You are being awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in military operations against an armed enemy force." I blinked, staring at the words on the page, as if they were written in a foreign language. "The President himself will present the medal at a formal ceremony next week. The Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. There had to be some mistake." I was just doing my job," I managed to say. "There is no mistake, Corporal," General Harris replied, his voice steady. "The intelligence you provided, while wounded and under direct fire, led to the rescue of 27 hostages and the prevention of 3 planned terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. 15 lives were saved by your direct medical intervention during the operation. Your actions embody the highest traditions of military service." Mr. Collins leaned in. "Certain details of the mission have now been declassified, specifically for this occasion. The President feels strongly that your heroism deserves public acknowledgement." As I stepped out of the Pentagon, still dazed, the weight of it began to settle. But along with that weight came a question I wasn't prepared for. Should I invite my family? Despite everything, even the dismissal, the ridicule, the cold indifference, A small, wounded part of me still longed for their approval. Maybe now, just maybe. After hours of quiet debate with myself, I sent the message. I'll be receiving the Distinguished Service Cross from the President at the White House next Thursday at 2 p.m. You're welcome to attend. My mother's reply came hours later. We'll check our schedule. Your father has a faculty meeting that may overlap. I let out a bitter laugh. A faculty meeting. My parents might miss their daughter receiving one of the nation's highest military honors, from the President of the United States, because of a faculty meeting. Eventually, they confirmed their attendance. They would come, Ethan too, but their tone made it clear. They weren't coming out of pride. They were doing me a favor. The day of the ceremony arrived beneath a flawless spring sky in Washington. The East Room of the White House had been carefully arranged. Rows of white chairs lined up for guests, and a modest stage where the president would present the medals. 3 other service members were being honored alongside me. I arrived early, my dress uniform immaculate, my ribbons and medals placed with surgical precision. As I waited in the holding room, I caught sight of my family entering the main hall through a side door. Despite their expensive clothing, they looked ill at ease, unmoored. My father glanced at his watch more than once, and they settled quietly near the bag. The ceremony began with military precision. Each recipient's story was shared, their actions described in formal, deliberate terms that somehow still fell short of conveying the chaos, the fear, the raw humanity of those moments. When it was my turn, I stood at attention as the military aide read my citation aloud. Corporal Alice Mitchell distinguished herself through extraordinary heroism while serving as a combat medic with Task Force Dagger. When her helicopter was shot down in hostile territory, Corporal Mitchell, despite being wounded by shrapnel, provided life-saving care to multiple wounded personnel under direct enemy fire. As the citation continued, I watched my family's expressions shift, from polite attentiveness to something closer to stunned disbelief. These were details they had never heard. They had never known. Corporal Mitchell's actions directly saved the lives of 15 American service members. Furthermore, the intelligence she gathered while under fire was instrumental in a later mission that rescued 27 hostages and prevented planned terrorist attacks on United States soil. The president stood, a rare breach of protocol. He looked directly at me as he spoke. The citation doesn't tell the full story, he said. Corporal Mitchell didn't just save her team. She helped rescue innocent civilians held for execution. She helped stop attacks that could have taken American lives here at home. Today we honor her extraordinary courage under the most extreme conditions. He rendered a formal salute, then placed the Distinguished Service Cross around my neck. Corporal Alice Mitchell, his voice echoed through the silent room. You've saved more American lives than most people will ever know. The weight of the medal on my chest felt almost unreal. As he shook my hand firmly, he leaned in and spoke softly. Some of those rescued were civilians, aid workers, even teenagers, he said softly. The impact of what you did goes far beyond the battlefield. I blinked back tears as I returned my seat. The room erupted into a standing ovation. Everyone except my family, who remained seated, stunned, seemingly frozen in place. After the formal ceremony, the crowd moved into a reception hall next door. Military leaders, politicians, and family members mingled over finger food and champagne. I quickly found myself surrounded, senior officers offering congratulations, commanders thanking me. Your actions represent the best of our medical corps, the Surgeon General said, gripping my hand firmly. A woman approached with a small group of civilians, introduced by a State Department official. Corporal Mitchell, the official said gently, these are some of the aid workers you helped rescue. One woman with kind eyes stepped forward and embraced me. They told us what you did, she whispered, how your intel saved our lives. I have a 5-year-old daughter who still has her mother, because of you. Camera flashes erupted around us. Public affairs had warned me the event would be covered by the press, though certain operational details would remain redacted. Across the crowd, I spotted my family standing awkwardly by the wall, visibly unsure of what to do. For the first time in memory, my father's usual composure had slipped. My mother's polite smile was replaced by something closer to bewilderment. Ethan looked at me as though truly seeing me for the very first time. They approached hesitantly, clearly overwhelmed by the generals and officials who now surrounded me like an orbit. Alice, my father began, his voice uncharacteristically tentative. That was quite an impressive ceremony. Thank you for coming, I replied evenly, keeping the emotional distance that now felt necessary, protective. We didn't know, my mother said softly, almost apologetically, about all of this. You never asked, I answered simply. Ethan cleared his throat. The things they said you did, was all of that real? Before I could respond, Major Davis appeared at my side. He didn't introduce himself. Mitchell's the best combat medic I've ever worked with, he said, voice firm. When we were pinned down and taking fire from 3 sides, she crawled across open ground to treat a wounded soldier, took shrapnel to her leg, and still dragged him 20 yards to cover. My family stared at him, speechless. I should check on Captain Rodriguez, I said, using the excuse to break the tension. He's one of my patients at Walter Reed. Of course, my father said quietly, the usual dismissiveness in his tone noticeably absent. As I turned to leave, General Harris stopped me, placing a firm, warm hand on my shoulder. Mitchell, he said, I'd like to introduce you to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He's heard about your innovations with wounded warriors at Reed. I caught a glimpse of my family watching from a distance, expressions now a strange mixture of shock, awe, and dawning realization. Throughout the rest of the reception, the pattern repeated. Senior military leaders sought me out. Former teammates treated me with visible respect. Medical directors asked about my protocols. And with every handshake, every exchange, every quiet word of gratitude, another piece of their old perception of me shattered. After the event wound down, I found myself momentarily alone until Ethan approached me. Alice, he said, his voice unusually humble. I owe you an apology. I've been arrogant and dismissive of your service. I honestly had no idea what you'd really done. You're right, I replied, not making it easy for him. You never asked. He nodded, accepting the sting of the truth. Can we start over? I want to actually know my sister this time. Before I could answer, my mother appeared, tears glistening in her eyes. When they described what happened to your helicopter, how you were injured and still saved those men, I couldn't breathe thinking how close we came to losing you. I tried to tell you I was hurt, I said gently. You told me I probably tripped over a tent stake. She flinched at the memory. We've been terrible to you, haven't we? Then my father stepped forward, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen. I watched how those generals spoke to you, he said softly, the respect in their eyes. I've been in academia for 40 years, and I've never earned that kind of respect from anyone. I steadied myself, refusing to unravel in that moment. I need to join the other recipients for the official photos, I said simply, neither accepting nor rejecting their outreach, just holding the boundary. As I walked away, Sergeant Torres fell into step beside me. Your family looks like they just got hit by a freight train, she said, half smiling. They're seeing me for the first time, I replied. Want to ditch this place after the photos? The team's meeting up at O'Malley for a real celebration. This time, I smiled genuinely. My real family was waiting. Absolutely. While we posed for photos, the president made a point to speak privately with each recipient. When he reached me, he glanced discreetly toward the rear of the room. Those people who look uncomfortable, are they your family? Yes, Mr. President. Well, he said thoughtfully, I think today they're finally seeing you. Sometimes it takes others to point out the extraordinary person standing right in front of them. Later, after the reception, I changed into civilian clothes and joined my teammates at a local bar where the celebration continued. No cameras, no podiums. Just laughter, real stories, and the comfort of shared experience. Some stories were solemn. Others were absurdly funny. No one needed to explain the weight of what we'd been through. Everyone at that table understood. My phone buzzed nonstop, texts from my family. I set it face down. There would be time for that conversation. Later. Tonight belonged to those who had recognized my worth long before any White House ceremony. The next morning, I opened a newspaper and saw a photograph from the event. My family watching as I received the medal, their faces masks of stunned disbelief. The caption read, Family of Distinguished Service Cross recipient Corporal Alice Mitchell looks on as her heroism is honored. They were no longer the authors of my story. They were witnesses. 6 months after the White House ceremony, I had settled into my new role as an instructor at the Army Medical Center. training the next generation of combat medics. My experience, both in the field and at Walter Reed, had earned me this position, where I now helped shape the future of military medicine. The Distinguished Service Cross changed much in my professional life. Faster promotions, new responsibilities, invitations to speak at medical conferences. But the most profound changes came not from the medal, but from what followed, especially within my own family. 3 weeks after the ceremony, my father showed up unannounced at my apartment in San Antonio. He stood awkwardly at the door, dressed in casual clothes I could hardly ever recall him wearing. There was no pretense, no grand speech, just a simple request. I was wondering if you might show me around your base. I want to understand what you do, if you're willing to let me. That day marked the beginning of a slow, often uneasy reconstruction. My father, the man who once measured the world through academic citations and lecture halls, began asking questions, real questions. And for the first time, he listened to the answers. He observed with genuine interest as I demonstrated emergency field techniques for a classroom of young medics. When a senior officer greeted me with unmistakable respect, I saw something new in my father's eyes, pride, not skepticism. Over dinner that evening, he finally admitted what had long gone unsaid. I was arrogant, he said plainly. I measured success by such narrow standards that I couldn't see the value in what you'd accomplished. My mother reached out in her own tentative way. Her early phone calls were clumsy, awkward, full of long silences, but they gradually softened into something more natural. She began sending care packages to my new address, something she'd never done during my deployments. In one box, I found a photo of my grandfather in uniform and his old Army medical badge, items I'd never seen displayed in their house. Taped to the photo was a note, written in her careful handwriting. Your grandfather would have been so proud. I should have seen the connection sooner. Of all the changes, my brother Ethan surprised me the most. He began volunteering with a legal aid program for veterans, offering pro bono services to help them navigate benefits and disability claims. On one of our now regular phone calls, he told me, I just want to understand your world better. These vets, they've opened my eyes to what service really means. 3 months after the White House ceremony, I agreed, cautiously, to attend a family therapy session during a visit home. Inside a sterile office with a warm but firm therapist, my parents finally found the words to explain what had driven their dismissal of my military service. I was terrified from the moment you enlisted, my mother admitted, tears running freely. Every news report about casualties in Afghanistan felt like a knife to my heart. It was easier to pretend your job wasn't dangerous than to live in constant fear. My father, usually the composed one, struggled to express his feelings. When your grandfather came home from World War II, he wasn't the same, he said quietly. The things he saw, they haunted him. I grew up watching that pain. When you chose that same path, all I could think was, I'd failed to protect you from it. You couldn't protect me, I replied gently, but you can stand by me. With the therapist's help, we started to untangle years of misunderstanding and emotional bruises, laying the groundwork for a new kind of relationship. We would never be the kind of family that exchanged hugs freely or finished each other's sentences, but we were learning to respect differences, to find common ground, and to speak truths we'd once buried. Then, during a Thanksgiving visit, my first home for the holidays in years, I stumbled upon something that reshaped how I saw my father. While helping him search for a book in his study, I opened a drawer and found an old Army recruitment pamphlet from the 1970s. There were handwritten notes in the margins. His handwriting. You considered joining? I asked, holding it out. His face softened with the weight of memory. I was ready to join the medical corps after grad school, took the physical, signed the papers. What happened? Your grandfather talked me out of it, he said quietly. He'd seen enough Mitchell men come back broken from war. He wanted something different for me. Then he looked at me with something deeper than pride. I think part of why I was so hard on you is because you had the courage to follow the path I couldn't. That Thanksgiving dinner felt unlike any other in my memory. For the first time, my family invited both my fellow service members and their academic colleagues to the same table. It was a gathering of two worlds that had always seemed incompatible, now sharing stories over turkey and pie. My mother had placed my Distinguished Service Cross on display in the living room. right beside Ethan's law degree and my father's academic awards. When a family friend asked about the medal, it wasn't me who answered. It was my father. There have only been 16 of these awarded in the global war on terror, he said, his voice firm with unmistakable pride. Alice's actions saved dozens of American lives. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared and the house had quieted down, my mother pulled me aside. She handed me a small box she had assembled in private, a memory chest. Inside were newspaper clippings from the ceremony, photographs of me in uniform, and a map with tiny pins marking each place I had deployed. I should have celebrated your service from the very beginning, she said softly. I'm trying to make up for the time I lost. Her gestures of acknowledgement touched me, yes, but they also revealed a deeper truth I'd come to understand during these months of reconciliation. My worth had never truly depended on their recognition. The president's words didn't make me valuable. They simply brought to light a value that had been there all along. That realization settled deeper a few days later, in a quiet moment after class at the training center. A young recruit approached me, eyes wide with admiration. Sergeant Mitchell, I enlisted after reading about you, she said earnestly. I want to make a difference like that. I smiled gently, remembering a time when I too had been searching for purpose. Medals don't make a medic, I told her. It's the willingness to run toward the wounded when everyone else is running away. It's doing your job even when no one sees, and no one understands what it costs. As I looked into her determined face, I saw a younger version of myself, full of questions, full of hope. The difference was, she was starting her journey with the recognition I had once longed for. But did that recognition change the essence of the service? Did it change the person doing the work? Find your purpose, I continued. Recognition may come, or it may not. But the lives you save, the difference you make, that's what stays with you. That's what matters. As I spoke those words, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I was truly free of the need for my family's approval. Yes, the president's words had changed the way my family saw me. But the truth was, I had already saved myself long before he ever said I had saved anyone else. Today, our family continues to heal, not perfectly, but intentionally. The boundaries we've set are strong, but there is real effort from all sides to bridge the past. My father recently attended a military medical conference where I presented. He sat in the front row and asked thoughtful, respectful questions. My mother calls more often now, and listens more than she speaks. And my brother and I, surprisingly, have found common ground in our different forms of service. We're not the family we once were, but maybe, in many ways, we're stronger. And what about you? Have you ever had your worth questioned by the very people who were supposed to know you best? Have you ever found validation in unexpected places? Moments that changed the way others saw you, or even how you saw yourself? If so, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this journey has resonated with you in any way, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't measured by someone else's applause. Thank you for listening to mine. And always remember, sometimes the people who see your value the least are the ones who should have known it best all along.